Something remarkable is unfolding across the globe, quiet enough to escape casual attention, yet powerful enough that its shockwaves are reshaping the international system. What began years ago as a simple idea, a loose grouping of ambitious emerging nations, has matured into a force that is now altering the balance of global influence. This evolution is not a routine enlargement or a symbolic gesture. It is a strategic recalibration of how the world is ordered, and it gathers under one expanding banner, BRICS. A coalition that has evolved from an economic curiosity into a rising superpower with global reach. BRICS started as nothing more than a catchy abbreviation: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and later South Africa. 5 nations seeking a stronger collective voice in world affairs. But the world of 2025 is no longer the world that coined the acronym. The alliance has grown far beyond its original design, transforming into a sprawling network of states aligned by shared economic needs and shifting geopolitical ambitions. Today, BRICS consists of 11 full members, 13 partner countries, and more than 30 additional nations eager to join its ranks. The turning point came swiftly. On January 6, 2025, Indonesia officially joined, bringing with it a massive population, a strategic position in Southeast Asia, and newfound influence stretching deep into the Pacific region. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia, invited back in 2023, still remains on the fence, caught between its decades-old partnership with the United States and the undeniable gravitational pull of BRICS's expanding sphere. Only a year earlier, at the start of 2024, the alliance had welcomed another wave of powerful entrants: Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates. Their participation added critical shipping routes, energy corridors, financial capital, and geographical bridges to the bloc's arsenal. With these nations on board, BRICS now accounts for over 45% of global GDP, when adjusted for purchasing power, and more than half of humanity. A reality that would have been dismissed as fantasy just 10 years prior. And the momentum hasn't slowed. The waiting list reads like a preview of a new international order. Out of 32 countries expressing interest, 23 have already filed formal applications. These include oil-rich Bahrain and Kuwait, manufacturing-driven Malaysia, strategically important Turkey and Vietnam, and even European bordering Belarus and North America's Mexico. Each applicant has its own reasons. Gulf states want relief from the dollar's dominance. Mexico sees an opportunity to become the alliance's anchor in Latin America. Belarus views BRICS as a path to greater regional influence. At the heart of the attraction lies something more substantial than political symbolism: capital. The BRICS New Development Bank, NDB, has quietly changed the lending landscape. Since its inception in 2016, it has financed nearly $32 billion in infrastructure across 96 major projects, many funded in local currencies. This move away from the US dollar has offered developing nations a rare path forward: the ability to borrow without sacrificing economic sovereignty to Western-controlled financial institutions. The 2025 Rio Summit marked the formal beginning of BRICS's next phase. Under Brazil's presidency, world leaders gathered to articulate a unified vision for the global South. Brazilian officials emphasized partnership over conflict, outlining a future focused on stable growth, collective development, and long-term cooperation. Yet beneath the polished diplomatic language, internal tensions were impossible to ignore. For the first time since 2013, Xi Jinping did not attend, citing scheduling conflicts. Vladimir Putin appeared only via video, still constrained by the international arrest warrant issued years earlier. Their absences spoke volumes, but the summit's message resonated even louder. BRICS was no longer content to exist as an alternative to Western power. It was preparing to become a central pillar of global leadership. Still, the alliance is not immune to internal debates. China and Russia advocate aggressive expansion, absorbing as many new members as possible to accelerate BRICS's rise. In contrast, India and Brazil prefer a measured approach, arguing that undisciplined growth could erode the bloc's stability. How BRICS manages this ideological divide will determine whether the alliance evolves into a durable global order or fractures under the weight of its own ambition. Beyond internal politics, the external landscape is becoming even more confrontational. The United States, under President Donald Trump, has escalated economic pressure against BRICS. What once seemed like a trade dispute has morphed into a broad economic standoff. Washington introduced new tariffs targeting BRICS economies, beginning with China. Beijing retaliated immediately, issuing tariffs that initially soared to 145% before settling around 30%. Instead of backing down, China redirected trade inward toward BRICS partners, strengthening economic bonds that bypass American markets entirely. Soon, India found itself in Washington's sights as well, a sign that the old rules of global trade are crumbling with unprecedented speed. What began as a financial coalition has now become something far larger, a geopolitical counterweight capable of rewriting the global narrative. BRICS is no longer a mere abbreviation. It is becoming a platform for a new world alignment, a challenge to long-standing power structures, and perhaps the most significant international realignment of the 21st century. A new political vocabulary is taking shape, one built on symbolism, shared interests, and a quiet but unmistakable act of resistance. As the BRICS coalition deepens its ties, one fact becomes harder to ignore. The era where a single power bloc dominated the world is sliding into the past. A multipolar order is emerging, one where influence is not funneled exclusively through Washington or Brussels, but distributed among rising centers like Sao Paulo, Moscow, Beijing, New Delhi, Jakarta, and others. The transition has already started. What remains to be seen is not whether the global landscape changes, but how boldly BRICS chooses to shape that change. India, once publicly praised by Donald Trump as a reliable partner, now finds itself targeted by Washington's most aggressive trade measures. What started as a 25% tariff on Indian exports quickly escalated to an astonishing 50%, sending shockwaves through Indian manufacturers and exporters who rely heavily on the U.S. market. Brazil was hit soon after. When the same 50% tariff barrier was placed on Brazilian products, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva called on BRICS countries to act collectively instead of responding in isolation, urging them to coordinate an economic counter-strategy. South Africa soon entered the crosshairs as well, facing a 30% tariff increase. What began as a trade dispute rapidly morphed into a political confrontation. Trump publicly accused the South African government of discriminating against the white minority population, a charge South African officials dismissed outright. Tensions escalated when reports emerged that some South Africans were being selectively exempted from U.S. travel restrictions, further worsening relations already strained by economic and diplomatic discomfort. Russia, already weighed down by earlier international sanctions, avoided additional trade penalties. But Moscow assumed a different role entirely. It became the intellectual and strategic driver behind the bloc's push to escape dependence on the U.S. dollar. President Vladimir Putin described the effort as a protective measure, an attempt to shield BRICS economies from Washington's political pressure and from the instability created by dollar-dominated financial structures. Central to this movement is the New Development Bank, NDB, the financial backbone of BRICS. Since 2016, the bank has approved more than $32 billion for nearly 100 infrastructure and energy projects across member states. Its most revolutionary feature, however, is its currency model. Instead of relying heavily on the US dollar, the NDB increasingly issues loans in members' local currencies. For countries like Ethiopia, Egypt, and Indonesia, this approach reduces exposure to currency shocks and US financial policies, providing stability that dollar-denominated loans often fail to offer. For many developing nations, this isn't just a convenient alternative. It's a lifeline. A major turning point came when Indonesia formally joined BRICS, a move confirmed publicly by the Brazilian government. With Jakarta's inclusion, the alliance now counts 10 members: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Indonesia, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates. Each new entrant broadens the bloc's footprint, spanning continents, energy corridors, trade routes, and political spheres. This is more than numerical growth. It represents a systematic repositioning of global influence. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres expressed the shift in stark terms. The existing international framework was designed by wealthy nations for wealthy nations. Most African countries weren't even represented when the Bretton Woods system, the foundation of modern global finance, was created. In that sense, BRICS is more than a coalition. It is an attempt to correct decades of imbalance, giving developing nations a voice, a presence, and a real share in global economic decision-making. Energy is the quiet force propelling much of this transformation. Should Saudi Arabia finalize its accession, BRICS would gain enormous leverage. Saudi oil exports combined with Russia's energy dominance and the existing participation of the UAE and Iran would give the bloc unprecedented control over global energy flows. For Washington, this possibility represents a deep strategic threat. If BRICS members begin settling oil purchases in non-dollar currencies, one of the main foundations of U.S. geopolitical power, petrodollar dominance, could erode. Yet the greatest challenge facing BRICS is not economic capability, but internal cohesion. The larger the coalition becomes, the more difficult it will be to synchronize the interests of nations with different political systems, development levels, and regional priorities. Trump's tactic of imposing tariffs on individual countries may exploit these internal differences by pressuring certain members to lean toward the U.S. for short-term economic relief. However, the opposite outcome is also possible. Increased pressure may strengthen the collective resolve of BRICS, speeding up the construction of a parallel global financial system that can operate independently of Western structures. What is evident is that BRICS is no longer an abstract idea. It is evolving into a tangible force, an economic and political counterweight to the Western-led international order. Its expanding membership, growing pool of resources, and command over vital sectors like energy place it at the center of the world's next economic chapter. In particular, the deepening partnership between Brazil and China, the B and C of BRICS, signals the emergence of a strategic coalition powerful enough to challenge institutions dominated by the G7. The stakes are enormous. For developing countries, BRICS provides an alternative path: access to fairer financing, diversified markets, and the ability to make policy decisions without external coercion. For traditional powers, the rise of BRICS represents a challenge to the very foundations of the system that has upheld their global influence for decades. As the alliance continues expanding, its choices regarding new members, trade strategies, and currency frameworks will send ripples through the global economy, from oil benchmarks and commodity prices to exchange rates and investment flows. Governments, corporations, and ordinary citizens will all feel the effects. The real question is no longer whether BRICS will influence the world order. The real question is how far it intends to go in reshaping the very architecture of global power. And the next phase of this shift isn't waiting for the distant future. It has already begun.